Tractate Bava Kamma, page 71. We are 2 lines from the top of the page. Today we're going to cover mainly 3 subjects. The first subject is continuation of discussion of yesterday and day before yesterday. Payment that more than the original payment, meaning if Mr. A stole something from Mr. B, we not only in some cases expecting him to return the item, many times there are an additional fine, additional payment. So for example, yesterday we learned in the oral Torah, in the Mishnah, important statement that if someone stole an animal, but then he's not only stole the animal, which means that he needs to return it, but he also slaughtered the animal. He's not only slaughtered the animal, he slaughtered it on a day of atonement, on Yom Kippurim. So we explain it's different between doing it for the ox or for the sheep. It's basically 4-fold for the sheep and 5-fold for the bakar, for the animals. So you see a special structure of payment. It's all depend upon the violation, how far. We have the violation of stealing, you have the violation of slaughtering, which means you cannot return the original item, but also it happens on a day of atonement. Now, we learned yesterday the concept of kimle b'derabba minei, which is a concept we learned many times. Kimle b'derabba minei meaning when you have a violation of something that involves 2 things. For example, something that the person deserves execution, and in addition there is a monetary loss. So we explained that the moment you impose the heavy payment, which is in this case is the execution, you free the person from monetary payment. So that's applied, for example, violation on Shabbat that involve also in a monetary payment. Here we try to juxtapose to the Day of Atonement and show the difference in the manner of payment. As a derivative from that, we're going to learn about enjoying type of work from someone on Shabbat. My teacher, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and his student, Rav Neuwirth, wrote a book, a monumental book, 2 volumes. It's called Shmirat Shabbat Kehilchata. And over there is a long write-up over the problems of derivative from benefit from a non-observant Jew. So we're going to learn the variation and understanding when and where and how one can have the opportunity to derive something from a fellow Jew or even from a non-Jew. And we're also going to learn the concept of shchita, since we explained one of the 39 type of work that prohibited on Shabbat is the slaughter on Shabbat. We need to learn, we're going to dig in, when exactly you consider something as a slaughter. Is that just the beginning stage, doing the incision and going through the animal, or the completion of the shchita? Yeshna l'shchita mitchila ve'ad sof. You go by the end process of the kosher slaughtering. So, 2 lines from top of 71. Ganav v'tabach b'yom kippurim. If someone, as we deal now with the first scenario, the first case, someone stole, then slaughter, he did it on the Day of Atonement. So the Mishnah said, Meshalem, he needs to pay the compensation is not only the principal, but also the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. So the Gemara asks, Amrei Amai, why here the thief needs to pay the 4-fold and the 5th-fold payment if it happens of the Day of Atonement? Nehid diktala leika, even we don't have the punishment of the rabbinic court for the desecration of the Day of Atonement, malkut miha ika. We have the here the derivative of the negative commandment. The Torah said in the book of Leviticus chapter 23 verse 28, anyone who does a work on this holy day, the Day of Atonement, so therefore the Mishnah in Tractate Makot, page 13, said that we impose upon that person a malkot, it's like a lashes. So they said, V'kaimalan de'eno ke'om shalem. We have this important principle, we learn it, if you remember, in Tractate Ketubot, page 32b, that when you have one that, again, have two different type of punishment, if it's a one same action, you do not impose both. So here you have the malkot and you have the monetary payment. So you can do both for one single violation. So the Gemara challenged and said, Amrei Hamani, to whom this Mishnah follow, Rabbi Meir de Amar, Loke Shalem. In the Mishnah in Tractate Makot, chapter 4, the first Mishnah, have a discussion. And Rabbi Meir said that the person, over there it's talking about a false witnesses. They came, they said that Reuven or Shimon 200 dinars, and it turned that another two witnesses came in and said, you guys are lying, you are with us in different location at that time, and etc. So they basically need to have two punishment. One is a malkot, and one the 200 dinars to a person that they planning clandestinely, surreptitiously to fail him for no reason. So the sages said that they paid and they not received malkot. But Rabbi Meir disputed and said that they do have to have both. So they said now the notion of imposing both follow the same in juxtaposition of Rabbi Meir over there in the Mishnah and Tractate Makot. So the Gemara said, challenge that. Rabbi Meir, if you follow that notion, again, what Rabbi Meir tells us, that a person can receive two punishments, two separate punishments for one violation. Okay? Again, to make sure we all remember, the punishment is the two witnesses that came and testified falsely in the court that someone owed to someone else 200 dinars, and it turns that another two witnesses came in and said, you are lying, you are with us in different locations. So according to the sages, you cannot impose both. According to Rabbi Meir, you can impose both punishments, which means they receive malkot and they need to pay the 200 dinars. So in comparison, we said here too, you can impose two separate punishments for one violation. So they said, Rabbi Meir, afilu tavach b'Shabbat. So even a person slaughter on Shabbat, that what we said, we have the rules of Kimle b'derabamine, we explained earlier, that you have one severe punishment, which is the execution, so you don't impose mandatory punishment upon that person. But here we said, if you follow that notion that the person slaughtered the animal on Shabbat, what did he need to get? In addition to severe punishment, he needs to pay fourfold and fivefold payment. So why we learn in the Mishnah on page 74 that if he slaughtered on Shabbat, since we have the rule of Kimle b'derabamine, he is exempt from mandatory payment. The Mishneh LaMelech challenged all of that. He says the whole idea of chayav tashlumim, that he needs to have the monetary compensation, it's only if he told the other fellow to slaughter for him, amar lo lishchot b'Shabbat. He said to the other fellow, do it for me, take that animal and slaughter it on Shabbat, which means in addition to stealing, he also asked the other fellow to slaughter on Shabbat. Even we said, divrei harav divrei talmid, if the God said that you cannot do it to whom you listen. But he said, the whole idea is, he tried to differentiate between stealing or doing slaughtering on Shabbat. If a person not initiate that, so the Mishneh Melech tried to separate between the two. But anyway, so if you tell me that this question of Rabbi Meir holds only that one can receive malkot and pay for the same crime, but he does not hold that one can be put to death and pay by the same crime. Velo ve'atanya ganav ve'tavach b'Shabbat, that as we said, he stole and slaughtered on Shabbat. Ganav ve'tavach la'avodah zara. As we learned yesterday, if someone stole an ox or sheep, and then what did he do? He slaughtered it to do what? To serve an idol worship. Or another case, Ganav Shor Haniskal, it was an ox that designated by the rabbinic court. The verdict that ox, for example, if it's a forewarned ox that did damage several times, so the decision was to stone him. And a person stole that ox, and then utvacho, so he stole an ox condemned to be stoned and slaughtered it. So all these cases, we said mishalem arba'a v'chamisha divrei Rabbi Meir. We impose on him fourfold and fivefold payment. V'chachamim potri, but the sages exempt, since as we said it's already one punishment, exempt from fourfold and fivefold payment. So what we see, Rabbi Meir hold that one simultaneously incurs liability to the death penalty and to payment is subject to both penalties. Amrei bar mina de'ai, you cannot bring that braita as a source. De'ait marala, because we learn in regards to that braita, Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, ve'amre la Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Rabbi Avin, ve'Rabbi Il'ah, ve'chol chavurta mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan Amrei. So all this group of great sages said on the name of Rabbi Yochanan, betoveach al yedei acher. That's the Mishnah Lamelech. That one who slaughtered by someone else, which means he stole, Reuven stole the animal, and then he asked Shimon to slaughter the animal for him, which means that the thief himself is not in violation of Shabbat, or the thief himself is not in violation of slaughter the animal to idol worshipping, and therefore is not, you cannot impose the execution on him. So therefore you can impose on him fourfold and fivefold payment. So in a way, Rabbi Meir agreed that if the thief deserves death penalty, then you can use the kimle b'derabba minei, that he is exempt from monetary payment, and he doesn't need to pay the fourfold and fivefold payment. So you can derive from that the meaning of the Mishnah, if someone slaughtered on Yom Kippur on a Day of Atonement, he needs to have those monetary payment, but if he did it on Shabbat, he's exempt. And that's basically, if you follow that notion, you follow in comparison to what Rabbi Meir said there, because as we said, Rabbi Meir hold that if a person received malkot, he needs to pay, but if a person receive a capital punishment, he does not need to pay. The Yam Shel Shlomo and the Maharsha, and mainly the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, think a little differently, the understanding of this Gemarrah, but we go by the literal understanding.
What about Rosh Hashanah? Do they talk about that at all? I'm thinking back to Beitzah.
So,
meaning, because since you don't know which is the actual day of Rosh Hashanah.
No, we call it Yom HaArichta.
So,
both days equal. That's the final conclusion.
But the discussion of Beitzah, with if an egg, if the egg was
right.
So so is there any difference in the payment, monetary payment, if it was a Rosh
Depends.
Hashanah as opposed to Yom Kippur? Since there is that slight ambiguity in Rosh Hashanah, that's not on Yom Kippur.
In conclusion, it's not ambiguity, because if we hold that Rosh Hashanah both days has equal meaning, then Rosh Hashanah is.
So we hold that with the Beitzah as well, with the egg as well.
Correct.
Even though the discussion was that because.
But the final conclusion is the same. Okay. וזה חוטא, וזה מתחייב. It means that the shaliach, the agent, is basically chote, he is sin by slaughtering the stolen animal, and you mean to say that the thief needs to pay a fourfold payment and a fivefold payment? We have the rule, and that's what Rabbi Akiva Iger emphasized. Ein shaliach ledvar aveira. A person cannot be an agent to commit a sin. Or we have the concept of divrei Rav, the divrei Talmud, Rav meaning what God said to us, and what a fellow man tells you to do, to whom you have to listen. So the Gemara said, אמר רבא שneacha דאמר קרא וטבחו או מחרו. מה מכירה על ידי אחר? אף טביחה על ידי אחר. So here again, the whole notion of the Torah said is slaughter or sell, it means that it was another person that involved with that. So we derive from that, if someone slaughtered by having a shaliach, as an agent, so the same way Tosfot Reed said that he is liable for slaughter, the same way as this is selling. דבר רבי ישמעאל תנא, לרבות את השליח. דבר חזקיה תנא, תחת לרבות את השליח. So again, what we derive from that the agent in the law of liability to a fourfold and a fivefold payment needs to pay. So the Meshech Chochmah derived from that. We learn in the book of Bereshit the story of Adam and Eve and the serpent, right? So we derive a concept, it's called En Toanim Le-Mesit, which means someone who is the instigator. We do not try to find a merit or zchut. So how you derive it is the story of the serpent. When God approached, so God approached Eve, right? But when it's come to a snake, God did not approach the snake in a sense that why you gave Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge. Why? Because if you engage with conversation with the snake, who is the instigator, he can say, Divrei Arab, Divrei Talmud. You told her not to eat from the tree of knowledge, right? You told her and her husband not to eat from the tree of knowledge. So whom she listen to, you, God, or to me, right? So the Midrash said how he convinced Eve to eat. He said, when Adam Arishon, when the first man drink wine, he thought that the only problem is only on a grape. So how he was convinced, the mother of all, Em Kol Chai, the Eve, the mother of all humanity. So the Or Sameach explained that the tree of knowledge, in a sense, he convinced that God wants you to understand the depth. That's the tree of knowledge, the depth of the secret of humanity and the depth of the whole creation. So how you do that? So even God said, don't eat it. That's the beauty, the serpent said. Eat it, and then you have the privilege to see things you don't know. So therefore, En Toanim Le-Mesit. So therefore God punished him right away. Cut off his leg and punish him right away. Because in this type of notion, you don't even start some type of way of teshuva, right? מתקיף לאמר זוטרא, מאיכא מידי דאילו אביד הוא לא מחייב, אביד שליח הוא מחייב. אמר לרבה שאתם לא משום מחייב הוא, אלא דקם לבדרה במיניה. So, because you have the heavy payment, punishment is not need to actually pay the liability. So, the Pri Megadim have a question if it's a twilight, if it's a Ben Hashmashot. Can you ask a non-Jew to do work for you? Or if you forgot to do something, can you ask a shaliach? For example, you have the lighting Shabbat candles. So if it's already, or if the mitzvah of Chanukah, we know that a candle on Shabbat is the idea that bring a light to the house, bring peace to the house, etc. So it's a well-known story about the late Moshe P, that when they light the candles on Shabbat, he asked the people in the house to turn off the light and to light the candles, and then those who would not accept Shabbat use the light, go back. That's the way the Chayei Adam said, that he said that the beauty of that is by bringing gladness and happiness to the house. It's something that chagigi, it's something that shows beauty. So the Maharam Shik, based on that, asked a question. When you have the Kohanim, and the Kohanim was asked to be the shlichim, to be the agent of Israel. So they are agent of Israel or the agent of God. Why? Because the Israel himself cannot bring the animal and slaughter it on the altar, right? So since he cannot do it, so the Kohen cannot be his shaliach. So you have to say that the shaliach, the Kohen is the agent to whom of Hashem, because the same as you cannot do it, so somebody else cannot do it for you if you are prohibited to do it. So you derive from that the Maram Shik, what the same as light the Chanukah candles. Imagine that it's already Shabbat, and you forgot that you have to light the Chanukah candles. So it's a problem, right? Can you ask someone else to light it for you, since you already accepted Shabbat upon yourself? It's not simple, it's a discussion halacha based on our sugya here. ואי תובח על ידי אחר, מה טעמה דרבנן דפטרי, if they are slaughtered through another person, what's the reason the sages who dispute Rabbi Meir and exempt the thief from the payment? אמרי מן חכמים, who is the sages? רבי שמעון, דאמר שחיטה שאינה ראויה, לא שמה שחיטה. So Rabbi Shimon said in page 70, we learn that if it's not a slaughter that allowed the meat to be used, it's not have the title of shchita, so therefore you cannot have the fourfold and fivefold payment. So Amrei, so they said, Bishlama avodah zara v'shor haniskal. We understand when we discuss the idol worshipping or the ox that was already designated in the verdict to be stoned. So therefore we understand that the meat is prohibited to drive any benefit. Shchita she'ena ruya, it's not fitting slaughter of the animal. Ela Shabbat. But if it's come to the situation that someone slaughter animal on Shabbat, why the sages exempt the thief from payment of fourfold and fivefold payment? Why? Because slaughtering on Shabbat, shchita re'uyahi, it's a fitting, the valid slaughter. Ditnan, we learn in Mishnah in Tractate Chulin, page 14, השוחט בשבת וביום הכיפורים, אף על פי שמתחייב בנפשו שחיטתו כשרה, if someone slaughter on Shabbat on a day of atonement, even is liable to pay with his life, as far as the meat is concerned, the slaughter is valid, and it's a discussion among the Rishonim, לכאורה, if someone slaughter on Shabbat, how you can eat the animal. It's the same din as mumar. The notion that said that it's tinok shenishba, but the Tosfot Chulin said mumar, it's only if someone did it purposely more than one time. But here, it's not relevant. So anyway, it's a discussion. Amrei, savar lak Rabbi Yochanan Sandlar. Rabbi Yochanan Sandlar, remember we visit Meiron and Tzfat in North Israel. It's his gravesite. Anyway, the beauty always said he had a job. He was a shoemaker. That's his income. But anyway, so here we hold the same. It's Rabbi Yochanan Sandlar that he prohibited to eat animal that was slaughtered on Shabbat. So therefore, ditnan hamvashel b'Shabbat. If someone cook on Shabbat and he did it unwittingly, unintentionally, b'shogeg, for example, he forgot that today is Shabbat, or he forgot that today is Shabbat, is prohibited to cook, yochal, he can eat it. It was unintentional. But he said, במזיד לא יאכל דברי רבי מאיר, but if it was intentional, so therefore he cannot eat it until after Shabbat, neither him nor others. That's, as we said, Rav Neuwirth in Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata elaborates on that. That's the sage's extraordinary fine for doing that intentionally.
Can't eat it ever.
Yes, that's the conclusion, yes. Rabbi Yehuda אומר, בשוגג יאכל במוצאי שבת, במזיד לא יאכל עולמית. Rabbi Yehuda said, if it's unintentional, you can eat after Shabbat. If it was intentional, so it's a different story. So you cannot eat it ever. Now, it's a difference between you do it for yourself, you do it for others. Anyway, Rabbi Yochanan Sandlar אומר, בשוגג יאכל למוצאי שבת לאחרים ולא לו. If it's unintentional, other people can eat it, but not him. That's בכדי שיעשה. ומזיד לא יאכל למית לו ולא לאחרים. Intentional, neither him nor others. So it's over. So the Magen Avraham and others speak about this serious problem, which is you have a non-observant Jew that does things for you. So it's a problem. For example, those companies that does things for observant people. Sometimes it's a serious prohibition, serious violations of Shabbat. So it's a problem. Many times people are not even aware how serious it is. The Minchat Yitzchak, the late Diane Weiss, and the late Rav Fisher and others discuss all these issues. Some fellow went and said, I'm going on Shabbat to a Kotel, to the Western Wall. After Havdalah, I'm going on a bus, going on a taxi, right? The problem is that the driver is not observant. He comes there, he prepared the car or drive there on Shabbat. So, if it's bichdei sheyaseh, if it was enough time after Havdalah, it's a different story. Or like flight. You're flying with a company of Jews. They're flying Motzei Shabbat. The flight is like hour or hour and a half after Shabbat. So it's neheneh mimaaseh Shabbat. You derive benefit for something that someone who's non-observant does it for you in Shabbat. What?
Like heating the bath.
Heating the bath.
Shabbat.
Or yes, or you go in a building and it's dark and an non-observant turn on the light. So is any difference if you turn it for himself? It's turned for you, or both? Do you need to wait after that? How far you allow, by any means, Maaseh Shabbat? That's the Magen Avraham that said that even you have a Mashgiach Kashrut, even you have someone who's watchover, but is indirect cook on Shabbat, he says you cannot eat there at all, because he said that's bliot ne'esarot, that then the whole derivative and the trust is gone. That's a famous Magen Avraham. So anyway, my tamad Rabbi Yochanan Sandlar. Why Rabbi Yochanan Sandlar prohibited any food that made toward intentional walk on Shabbat? So the explanation is because Kedidarish Rab Chia ad Pitcha devei Nesiya. That's the way Rab Chia expounded at the entrance of the house of the Nasi. The Torah said in the book of Shemot, chapter 31, verse 14, Ushmartem et ha-Shabbat, you shall observe the sacred of Shabbat, ki kodesh hilachem, because the Shabbat is consecrated for you. So the idea that we refer to Shabbat as a consecrated, so we derive for that, ma kodesh asur ba'achila, anything that is consecrated is forbidden to eat, because it's consecrated. Af maaseh Shabbat asur ba'achila. So even you derive from that the labor or product of forbidden Shabbat labor is forbidden for benefit as well. So the truth is, there is a Tosfot in Tractate Beitzah that bring the famous disputation between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. We know that Beit Hillel v'minag, that let's start with Shammai. Shammai is he found a nice animal. He says, today is Sunday, I saved this animal for Shabbat. Right? And then on Monday he found a better one. So he basically ate the animal for Sunday, and the Monday he saved for Shabbat. Which means every single day he tried to find something nicer that he will eat on Shabbat. Versus Hillel, that he said, Baruch Hashem Yom Yom, that every single day you have this kind of faith. So it's all depend upon Midat HaBitachon, how much trust each person have. But what Beit Shammai did is a very important message, that they derived the Zachor, remember the Holy Shabbat, who sanctified it, how far, kama she'efshar. So Tosfot asked a question, if Shammai bought some animal on Sunday and he says for Shabbat, and then on Monday he found something nicer, So what did he do with the first one? So he said that he ate it. Why he is not selling it? So Tosfot said that is another meaning. Why? The Gemara said to us in Tractate Sanhedrin, the Gemara said that on Shabbat, a person, if he's not trained his belly, his stomach to certain food, he will not feel so well for the huge difference in eating on Shabbat. So Shammai, as a result, ate what he purchased on Sunday in order for himself, for his system to get used to certain food. And therefore, on Shabbat, he feel good about eating that animal. So that's the idea of observing Shabbat properly, receive nachala bli metzarim, receive a special extraordinary reward, because in order to fulfill the mitzvah of eating on Shabbat properly, a person needs to be satiated during the week, meaning it will not have shinui me'argel, it doesn't have a change in his habit of food than the week, in order for him not to be sick, because if you have a huge change in your system, even it's a good food, your system will resent it. So that's the Ktav Sofer explained, that's what it's written, 6 days you shall walk, and on Shabbat, La Hashem Elokecha, it shall be so you Lord your God. You walk hard all these 6 days in order for the Shabbat to be for your Lord God. That's the idea of observing Shabbat properly, or receive Nachala Bli Meitzarim. In order to receive that reward for Shabbat, a person to have the structure a whole week to think how to observe Shabbat properly. So the Gemara said, "I makodesh asur b'anah, af maasei Shabbat asur b'anah." So the same way that the consecrated item is forbidden to have only for consumption, but for benefit as well, the same way the product of forbidden Shabbat labor is forbidden for benefit as well. Talmud lomar, the Torah said, "Lachem," for you, "Shelachem yeh," it shall be yours, which means it's permitted for benefit. So Rabbi Chia continue, "Yachol afilu beshogeg." You may say that even if it was unintentionally, did it, so it's also prohibited to eat. Talmud lomar mechalalei amot yumat. We said the one who desecrates the Shabbat shall receive a punishment, death punishment. B'mezid amarti lecha velo b'shogeg. It's only if you do it deliberately, act on Shabbat desecration, but not if you did it inadvertently on Shabbat. So the Yerushalmi, he brings that Rabbi Chia saw someone who desecrated the Shabbat. So he cut like a grass, something like that on Shabbat. So he wrote to him after Shabbat, Mechalalei amot yumat. So the Vilna Gaon explained why Rabbi Chia wrote. So he said, because the Gemara said in Tractate Megillah that the Rabbi Chia didn't know how to say properly the word het, with het. So therefore he wrote Mechalalei amot yumat, and he didn't say it because otherwise he interpreted Mehalalea with hey. So it's a famous statement from the rabbi of Pelancha, it's a city in Poland. Some said it, Shlomo Zalman said it, but anyway, Rabbi Chia was the one who said in other location that he was the Shliach Tzibur, Itpalel Lifnei Amud, he's the one who represent people, because they said that in his prayer he can bring the redemption. It was so if he said Mashiv Arwach, he can said instead of Mashiv, Mashav. So the same way, if he said, for example, Mechayem Etim, so if he said it wrongly, it's better. Why? Because if he said Mechayem Etim or Rofeh Cholim, that everything that he prayed happened. And it was a concern, that's the way he explained in heaven, that if he said it will be premature. So therefore he said it mehayemetim, which like with hay, that they ifriu lo mishamayim. But anyway, pligi Rabbi Raviacha, Ravacha v'Ravina. Chad Amar, that according to Rabbi Yochanan Sanlar, Maaseh Shabbat Doraita, that is a biblical prohibition to eat anything that was made on Shabbat. וחד אמר מעשה שבת מדרבנן. So the Chazon Ish hold that you cannot use electricity on Shabbat. It's a famous notion of Chazon Ish in Eretz Israel. Why? Because he said that eventually it's a fellow Jew that does that for you. The others challenge that because, number one, they use it sometimes for the hospitals, for pikuach nefesh, or it's a tosefet, or anyway, not everyone goes along with that. But anyway, man damar doraita k'da'amaran, man damar derabanan, amar kra kodesh hi, kodesh ve'en maaseh kodesh. So that's basically it's a challenge what the Taz said in Yoreh De'ah 117, that how far the sages can abrogate it, what the Torah said. But anyway, if you go by the one who says that his prohibition against consuming the product of Shabbat labor is from the Torah, Amtu, it's because 71b, Lehachi Patrei Rabbanan. So for this reason, the sages exempt the thieves that his agent slaughtered the stolen animal on Shabbat from paying 4 1/5 whole payment, because according to Rabbi Shimon, that it's actually the sages, it's not befitting שחיטה שאינה ראויה, and therefore אין שמה שחיטה, אלא מאן דאמר דרבנן. But even the one who said that even Rabbi Yochanan Asandlar hold that anything that make on Shabbat is prohibited to eat, it's a rabbinic, amai patre rabbanan. Why the sages exempt the thief from paying 4-fold and 5-fold payment? Okay, so here we need to elaborate for a second. The Gemara said in Tractate Bava Kamma, page 34, it's Rashi's there, and it's Shitam Kubetzet, and many more. The key is that as much as is violation of Shabbat, we're not allowed to do on Shabbat a shchita, which is one of the 39 type of melachot, but Rabbi Akiva Iger explained and others, the merely fact that the slaughtering itself was kosher, that basically did not make that animal not fitting. So the point is, as far as the biblical concern is all about, we do not have that issue. We have the rabbinic. So with that said, in Shulchan Aruch Yoreh De'ah, chapter 2, he explained it deeply. But the key is, we kind of try to differentiate, as far as the Torah is concerned, between slaughtering something in the right process, from the beginning to the end, versus or in conjunction to the day, that the day by its essence is prohibited. So the question is, here we are, and the sages exempt the thief from paying 4-fold and 5-fold payment. The problem is that biblically speaking, you do not have the issue of eating kosher animal that's slaughtered on Shabbat, kosher slaughtered animal that the slaughtering happened on Shabbat. So therefore, as far as the biblical is concerned, it's good shchita. So the Gemara responded and said, according to the view of Rabbi Yochanan Asandlar, that prohibited anything that occurred on Shabbat by rabbinic term, it means ash'ara. All these things that they say that it's rabbinic prohibition by Rabbi Yochanan Asandlar, it's when the rabbis in the Braita exempt the thief from the tashlumei arba'a v'chamisha, 4-fold and 5-fold payment. So they refer to the two cases Rabbi Meir mentioned, which is avodah zara, to serve the idol worship, as we explained earlier, v'shor haniskal, an ox that condemned to be stoned. So that's where the sages agree to Rabbi Meir that a 4- and 5-fold payment applies. So from the Braita it turns that Rabbanan cholkim al hakol, the sages disputed everything. The Maharshal, the issue of all concept, we know that Rabbanan has the power, koach hachamim, leafkia davar ma'atorah. The sages have the power to abrogate it, to expand, to override a biblical terms. It's more in Psachim. Remember, we studied it with a person betrothed a woman, and he betrothed for like those stocks that it doesn't have the shve pruta. So we said that it's also מדרבנן, and אינה מקודשת. So anyway, צריך עיון דמרשל. Anyway, ורב מאיר המאי מחייב, שוחט לעבודה זרה. Why רב מאיר impose the payment upon the one who slaughtered the idol worship liable to the fourfold and fiffold payment? המאי מחייב בשוחט לעבודה זרה, כיוון דשחט בפורתא אסרא. Because he cuts it little, he basically rendered forbidden as a idolater's offering. אידך, איסורי הנהר ולא דמרי כתבך. Is not applied to the animal of the owner because he lost some of the animal before he slaughtered. Because Rashi explains, he make it asura ba'ana. So they said, Amarava be'omer bigmar zvicha hu ovda. So the Bible refer where the slaughterer says that he means to worship the idol only with the completion of the slaughtering. So here you see Machloket Rashi and Tosfot. In general, we have Machloket Amoraim in page 72 for the whole concept of Shechita. If the Shechita ena l'shechita ele basof or not, which means the definition, legal definition of Shechita. One view is that the completion of the process legally constitute the act of Shechita. It's only the end, which means the cutting of the trachea and asparagus. So the prior to the completion of the act is viewed strictly as primarily to the legal act of slaughter. But you have the other one that they said that it's until the organ is served. So again, the big question is, you go by the beginning, you go by the end. Here the Gemara follow the idea that you go by the end. So it means as soon as the agent begins the act of slaughter and makes his initial incision, the act of quote-unquote slaughter for idol worship has been performed to the animal, rendering it prohibited for benefit as a idolater's offering. But again, as we said, that this is a machloket between Rashi and Tosfot. Shoanis, kalisura naninu, lav demare katavach. He's not slaughtered the animal of the order. Amarav acham ma'askiran kagon shemesaro leshomer ve'ezik. He gave it to a guardian, and he gave it to the custodian, and therefore ve'ezik beveit shomer, and he killed the person while the house of the in the custody. V'uad beveit shomer, and it was testified against the muad while in the house of the custodian. V'nigmar dino beveit hashomer, and which means that the verdict of the sending him to death, it's basically happened while in his custody. Rabbi Meir savar lak Rabbi Yaakov savar lak Rabbi Yeshua. So Rabbi Meir hold the same as Rabbi Yaakov, that the thief needs to pay 5 payment. Even at the time of the final stage, the ox has no value. סבר לה כרבי יעקב דאמר רב שכבר נידנו החזירו לשומר לבעלים מוחזר. וסבר לה כרבי שמעון דאמר דבר גורם לממון, כי ממון דמי, that's a famous Gemarrah in בבא בתרא. דבר גורם לממון כי ממון דמי, that something that can cause a benefit of money is considered as money. דתנן, as we learn in Mishnah in page 74, רבי שמעון אומר קודשים שחייב באחריותן חייב, על מה דבר גורם כי ממון דמי. Anyway, we're running out of time. אמר רב כהנא אמרי לשמדה כמדי רב זביני נהרדיה, ממקצית מוקמית מתניתין כרב מאיר ולא כרבי שמעון. והקטן סבר רבי שמעון פותר, ושני לא מכלל בדחולה מתניתין מודה. אמר לי לא מכלל דמודה, בטבח ומחר לפועל לכלבים. גנב משל אביו וטבח ומחר, בא מן הרב מרב נחמן. גנב שני שודפים ומחרו. והודע לאחד מהם, מהו? 5 בקר מרחמנה ולא 5 חצאי בקר, או דין מה 5 בקר מרחמנה, ואפילו 5 חצאי בקר. So again, the question is how far you go. You go 5 half cattle or not? So he said, אמר לי 5 בקר מרחמנה ולא 5 חצאי בקר. So he said, הייתי בגנב, משל אביו גנב וטבח ומחר, ואחר כך מת אביו משלנדר של 145. והאחה, כיוון דמת אביו כגון שקדם והודע לאחד מהם דמי, וקטן הם שלם דרשמי 45, אמר לאחה במעסקן גון שעמד דוד בדין. אבל שלא עמד בדין, מאי? אינו משלם תשלומי 4 ו-5. יחד איתן לספר, גנב משל אביו ומת, ואחר כך טבח ומכר, אינו משלם תשלומי 4 ו-5. נפלוג ונתלה בדיד, ונפלוג בדידי. באים מדברים כשעמד בדין, אבל לא עמד בדין, לא משלם תשלומי 4 ו-5. אמר לאח אינמי, עד נסיב רישא, גנב משל אביו טבח ומכר, ואחר כך מת אביו ונסיב סייפא נמי, גנב משל אביו ומת אביו ואחר כך טבח ומכר. לצפרא אמר לי 5 בקר מרחמנה ואפילו 5 עצי בקר, ועד לא אומרים לך באורתא. It's a story about the משכילים. So the beginning they start writing a contrasts, try to say that all the traditional Judaism is no basis. So the Netziv Mivolozhin said that is no such a thing גדולי ישראל שטעו, is no such a thing that the Gedolim, the leaders, made a mistake. He bring the Beit HaLevi also bring a raya, bring a proof from Moshe Rabbeinu. They said, "Vayishma Moshe ba'itav be'enav." So it means he admitted when it was wrong. So that's for sure knocked them out. That's the famous Beit HaLevi. Anyway, we are page 72. So the lo achlei bisra de Torah. So there's a two version. Rashi said, "Lo digdakti ta'amo shel davar." Was because I did not eaten the meat of an ox. Which means that that's a figurative means, but the Gemarrah Bava 22 said that it means that you can learn better, you didn't instruct it properly, the Bible have his explanations. Anyway, ואלה מה ישנה רישא ומה ישנה סייפא, אמר לי רישא קרינה בה וטבחו כולו באיסורא, סייפא לא קרינה בה וטבחו כולו באיסורא. So Reb Nachman Breslav said, Tosfot said here, Sharui b'Ta'anit Haya. So the explanation is, Reb Nachman Breslav said that there is a part in food that's called the Sitra Acha. Besuda we have a Mayim Achronim, or the way the Ramban said that is a Sa'ir La'azazel. But anyway, it's a chelek of the Sitra Acha. So because I didn't give the Sitra Acha its part, so I didn't learn the Torah properly. So it's a famous story that happened by the Hasidic Rebbe, the Rav of Apta. So one of his greatest Talmidim, one of his greatest students was Parush. He used to fast, he used to do all kind of things that they extraordinary. And one time he almost became a shumad. So eventually he was saved, he came back to the Rebbe of Apta. So he said that everything you eat is a chelek gashmi, a chelek ruchani. There is a part that is spiritual and there is a part that is physical. So he said the whole idea of you fast, the whole gashmiut filled with gava, with other things. That's what exactly the Baal Shem Tov said. That when you eat, you have to say that you eat in order to serve Hashem properly, and then the spark of that food turned to be a spiritual. I'm eating in order to serve Hashem properly, and therefore you can combine the two, and even you mekadesh et atzmecha b'mutar lecha. You take this, the food that is gashmiut, and you make it as a ruchani, it's a spiritual.